right now, I guess we got to get into a discussion here about the West deliberately provoking war. So
That's a
I
very
think that's a heck of a way to start the show, but we
very
better go
spiffy,
for it.
very spiffy bow tie,
Oh
Don.
yeah, yeah.
Meanwhile,
Matthew,
Joaquin Hagopian has been publishing wonderful stuff. I'm the original publisher of these articles of his on my blog at jamesfetzer.org. West deliberately provoking nuclear World War III and part of the elite's great resets. The Russian First Deputy Permanent Representative addressed the UN Security Council Tuesday. We started a special military op to put an end to bombardments of Donbass by Ukraine and to make sure that Western states that helped to turn it anti-Russia and its national leadership stop posing a threat to both Russia and those living in Ukraine's southern and southeastern areas. The ops will continue until these goals are achieved. By supplying them weapons, you only prolong the agony of the criminal Kiev regime ready to sacrifice its own population. The sooner you realize this, the sooner Ukrainian leadership comes to the negotiating table with a realistic position rather than pompous slogans and phantom pain. This is a very clear statement of what's going on. NATO members, unfortunately, are getting carried away. As a consequence, Russia is sharing the Iskander-M tactical missile system, which can use ballistic or cruise missiles with Belarus. I would anticipate it's going to be more general. They're going to supply this weapon to other nations friendly to Russia. When idiots like General Patrick Sanders, the newly appointed commander of the British Army, uses warmongering rhetoric, telling his troops to get ready to fight World War III in Europe against the most powerful nuclear country on earth, he's not working for the people, but for the ruling elite. And then there are older generals like Wesley Clark reminiscing in his glory days of slaughtering Yugoslavia with a 1999 bombing campaign, claiming the only way to end the conflict in Ukraine is to deploy NATO forces against Russia. We've never been closer to mushroom cloud madness, all by demonic bloodline design. On Monday, Putin ally and former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev specified a Russian red line. For us, Crimea is a part of Russia, and that means forever. Any attempt to encroach on Crimea is a declaration of war against our country. Secretary General of NATO Stoltenberg admitted the all too obvious. The reality is we've been preparing for this since 2014, when, of course, Victoria Nuland executed a color revolution in Ukraine to depose a Russian-friendly president and install Western puppet. And at that point, Ukraine began shelling the Donbass region. That's the reason we've increased our presence in the eastern part of the alliance, why NATO allies have started to invest more in defense, why we have increased our resident. In other words, they're anticipating going to war with Russia. Meanwhile, Finland has been preparing for decades for a Russian attack to stir up more tension. A NATO document from a summit held Wednesday stated, we have decided on new security measures to step up tailored political and practical support to partners, including Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, and the Republic of Moldova. We'll work with them to build their integrity and resilience, develop capabilities, and uphold their political independence, and thereby make them targets. NATO has also agreed to put up over 300,000 troops on high alert, up from the 40,000 currently to counter Russia, the country designated as posing the greatest threat over the decade. Here's a situation. It's either urgent aid to Ukraine sufficient for victory or a declared war between Russia and you. This is declaring Zelensky. Financial aid for Ukraine has no less significance than arms deliveries. We need some $5 billion every month. And I'll tell you, they're using that money for very good purposes to buy expensive real estate in Switzerland, for example. Meanwhile, Ukraine is going to be a testing ground for new robotic warfare with a Terminator robot device to fight and kill Russians with a 7.62 machine gun, multiple functions, delivery of ammo and food, surveillance, reconnaissance, evacuation, repeater for radio communication and control, and satellite for larger robotic platforms on a 110-pound all-metal 2-by-2-foot weapon on 4 or 6 wheels, remotely controlled from 5 kilometers away. Western military intelligence cells operating within the Pentagon's Eastern Command functioning in Ukraine and beyond are providing a stealthy network of logistic training and intelligence to speed Allied assistance to Ukraine. The coordinated U.S. NATO command system has been operational throughout the Russian incursion. The fallacy that Ukraine has been a proxy war belies the fact it has been commanded by the Pentagon, the CIA, and NATO from the get-go. Biden and the corporate propaganda spin that there are no U.S. boots on the ground as a necessary precaution has been proven to be pure bullshit. For years, the West has a history of engaging in nonstop provocations to escalate tensions, which have now reached a boiling point, to ignore a world war, a world nuclear war, as part of the actual reset plan all along. Scott, your thoughts?
Well, on that latter part of Hagopian's article, which I enjoyed very much as well, he's exposing the U.S. NATO generals, admirals, flag officers that have been captured. They've been in there since 2014, one of whom was Admiral Eric Olson, who was my old boss at U.S. Special Operations Command. And the guy whose Learjet I flew down with and upset the apple cart in so many different ways. And Admiral Eric Olson was one of the conspirators that threw me under the bus when I was reporting on the terrorist financing that was occurring under Dov Zakheim at U.S. Special Operations Command, Central Command, and a variety of other ways. He also was introducing the rabid lesbian LGBTism into military and special operations. So he's a very dirty guy. But I've said before, all of these dirty scumbags, James Mattis, H.R. McMaster, Ambassador Taylor, Eric Olson, all of these former military clowns have joined a group called spiritofamerica.org. People can look it up, Google it, spiritofamerica.org. That is the secret think tank, Jim, of the deep state, because they've all joined this organization, and this organization has been in Ukraine launching propaganda wars against Russia, whipping up anti-Russian sentiment in the Ukrainian people. This is the organization that's been doing it under the CIA and the British, no doubt. So the Russian television broadcasts that I've been on have been talking about it, and I've been talking about it prolifically. But this is one of the key targets that we really need to expose. Spirit of America and all of these people that behind it. Perkins Coie have a lawyer part of this group. I mean, it is the deep state think tank. But they've been launching, again, that article summarized it well. They've been launching a war against Russia since 2014. They've instituted the coup d'etat. They replaced Yanukovych. They put in Poroshenko. They aggressively kept their biochemical labs into Ukraine for the development of, among other things, animal-to-human transmission that has been directly linked to the COVID-19 phenomenon because they were developing this. They shared it with Merck and Pfizer and all these other organizations. They then sent it to Fort Detrick. They then sent it to Wuhan. All of that's been exposed by the Russians at the United Nations. The Russians have been exposing all of the corruption and the money laundering and the human trafficking that Ukraine has turned into a cesspool over. And it really has become a retarded nation. And I've known people from Ukraine and such, and Russia, and it's a different country. But now it's become the hills have eyes. It's become a knuckle-dragging, retard, a Nazi fanatical ruin, and the West is just going to burn it ultimately to the ground. It is becoming the new battlefield practice zone for these sort of weapons. But as the beginning of the article says, NATO doesn't understand what they're messing around with, which is the Russian bear that sees all of these activities as an existential threat. And if there's one thing that Russians are prepared to fight and die and push and endure horrific agony over, it's their motherland and the preservation of the Russian people. There is no communist hammer and sickle flag anymore. There is no communist ruling regime. There's the Russian Orthodox Christian conservative family values people that believe wokeism is a crime against humanity, as I do, and that the rainbow flag, LGBT, homosexual military recruitment ads are all a sign of the decadence of the West, which is accurate. And the real comedy is the delusion that these people in NATO and Wesley Clark, who should be crucified and executed for failing to honor the oath he had as a flag officer when he discovered all of the 9/11 corruption. All of these Western NATO leaders are under the delusion that somehow there's not going to be any consequences on them. Somehow they can get away and float like Mary Poppins with an umbrella over the battlefield, and that suddenly they're going to come down landing in the future sometime, and everything is going to be okay, and the West is going to be triumphant. No, they are going to try and float away and understand their umbrella has been shattered, and now they're going to be executed for war crimes. And what was once Western civilization could very easily be turned into a smoldering black battlefield. The people of America and Europe understand this. That's why that article was good too, because these military-industrial complex whores are not representing anything about the people creating the government, not the government ruling over the people. But they are running mad dashedly towards this conflict, while everybody in America stands against this. It's been talked about by Laura Ingraham. It's been talked about by Tucker. It's been talked about by a lot of people saying the American people don't want war with Russia. The British people don't want war with Russia. Nobody wants war with Russia because they understand, hey, this isn't a bunch of Bedouins and flip-flops and man dresses. This is the Russian army, and Scott Ritter's talked about it too. We do not have the capability to fight and win Russia like we did in the 1980s because of the effeminacy, because of the degeneration, because of all sorts of cancers that we have self-inflicted on our military doctrine and our culture. So I think you're going to witness, sadly, the continuation of a NATO Western military wokeism that thinks it's going to push against Russia. And I think there's going to be an outbreak somewhere, sometime, and the West is going to be absolutely shredded and shattered, and Americans are going to lose their sons and daughters. They're already losing them for the COVID-19 vaccine. That's another story. But this is going to have a flare-up somewhere. And Russia is going to, I think they're going to be restrained, but they're also going to be terminal. They recognize this is a battle that if the West brings it, the Russians are going to have to end it. They know that. We don't. We're thinking we're going to bluff, but as Ritter said, Russians don't bluff. Jim?
Holly,
Wow. Wow.
Well, I was just seeing lately that even the mainstream news is admitting that Russians have taken over some of the last holdouts of, the Ukrainian fight, if you will, which is being heavily funded by the Biden administration and the West and the G7. Belarus claims to have shot down Ukrainian missiles at this point, so they're coming out more and more in the open, as it appears as though the mainstream media over here in the West has to admit that Ukraine has lost, which we've been talking about since the very beginning, that this wasn't, a fight. They're trying to turn into a fight for World War III, whereas Russia has been describing it as more of an internal operation between factions, which have been put in by the West since at least 2014 openly. If you look at the Western news, even been talking about this, how we've been funding color revolutions and overthrows of Ukraine and all the money laundering that has been going on over there, as well as other types of laundering, I'll just say. And they're trying to drag Turkey into it now by Turkey detaining Russian cargo ships, definitely pushed by the West as well, trying to get us into this quagmire to try to weaken Russia. But if anything, it's becoming more and more obvious to the rest of the world that Ukraine is under Russian control, and Russia is in the right in this case, since they've been the West has been positioning itself up against the Russian border for decades now without any sort of repercussions from Russia. And they also know, as we have discussed before, and you can see if you can actually find translations, that Russia knows that this is also an economic and a spiritual war. Like Scott said, the destruction of Western culture, we'll just say, has been degrading so much of the West. It's pretty obvious now, where people are basically just self-immolating. It seems like, especially people my age and younger, just completely falling apart around us in so many different ways right now. And while we see a buildup of BRICS, of Russia getting onto the gold standard, and then other countries such as India, Iran, and even China trying to position itself step away from what is going on with the West. Moldova, I just wanted to say as well, is starting to position itself towards Russia as well.
Let me just add, I have friends who were in Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates, for about a week. And the coverage is completely different. So Russians are recognized to be in the right, that the Ukrainians are putting up no mess, and that Americans are propagandized and misled by their own government in a way that makes the United States an international joke. I have no doubt, by the way, that they're pushing war for the very reason that BRICS is moving forward, an outcome that's going to change a global economic and energy distribution, that Russia is getting stronger. Saudi Arabia is about to join. In a strategic geopolitical pressure from MBS ahead of the meeting, where he was really calling out that this may be going forward, Biden is being geopolitically slow roasted by Saudi Arabia for his previous disparagements and ideological hypocrisy of Saudi Arabia. We've been closely monitoring the signs of a global cleavage, essentially Western governments following Build Back Better climate change, stopping to use coal, oil, and gas. The rest of the economy of the world is using the more efficient and traditional forms of energy and are growing stronger and stronger and stronger. Here's a money quote. China's invitation to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to join BRICS confirms the kingdom has a major role in building the new world and become an important and essential player in global trade and economics. This accession, if Saudi joins it, will balance the world economic system, especially since the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is the largest exporter of oil in the world, and it's in the G20. If it happens, this will support any economic movement and development in world trade and economy and record remarkable progress in social and economic aspects, and Saudi Arabia should have partnerships with every country in the world. Here you see the way the alignment is falling out. The yellow, the Western-oriented, capitalist-oriented countries, all those in the gray, likely participants in the new world economic order, which in this case is a positive development for humanity, shrinking power, economic and political, of the West being manifest here geographically by the map. For a deep dive, the bottom line, the 2022 punitive economic and financial sanctions against Russia was the reason BRICS was assembled in the first place. It's growing now. They do not want corporations and multinationals running their government. They want the government running the government, and that means whatever form of government that exists in their nation, even if it were communist. The BRICS leaders are aligned as anti-corporatists. That doesn't necessarily make them better stewards. It means they want to make the decisions and do not want corporation to become more powerful than they. If you want to boil it down, you'll find BRICS is the opposing element to the World Economic Forum and its global reset. This is fantastic. The BRICS team, especially if Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Argentina are added, creating BRICS Plus would be a counterbalance to Western trade and finance, moving from it's moving from possibility to likelihood, I would say probability. If Saudi joins BRICS, the fracture becomes almost certain. Scott, your thoughts?
Well, the multipolar world, that was the schematic and the strategic outlining of how the world was going to evolve over the next 10 to 20 years, which Alexander Dugin did. He was a professor. He's also an intellectual advisor to Putin. I met Dugin when I was in Iran at the New Horizons conference. I had breakfast with him, and very fascinating guy, long bearded, but very humble and very smart. And, he was very honest. And that's what animates the multipolar world, and the BRICS initiative is an honesty about they want the world and the people of the world to evolve and determine their own destiny. And that runs contrary to the CIA British dominated empirical model, where every nation needs to be controlled and ordered, and subsequently their resources sucked into the empire of America to keep the petrodollar rolling, in exchange for the confetti of patriotism and order and new rules order and new world order and all that jazz. But incidentally, the confetti is saturated with the poison of homosexuality, lesbianism, LGBT wokeism, abortion, environmental climate worship, and all of these other pathologies that masquerade as political enlightenment. And the world is recognizing this, and they're forming the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Saudi initiative. And also other countries are going to be joining that. I'd say Vietnam needs to join that, of course. They're targeting South America, but Vietnam is a very powerful one. Indonesia, the Philippines. They're being strategic about it because they need to win the big targets first, such as Saudi Arabia, which is a major big target. And I think it's going to evolve naturally that way, Jim, because, again, the West is so delusional. And I say that with uttermost sadness because, let's reflect for a minute. The 4th of July in America is defined for us and within us by our parents. My mother and my father defined what America and American culture was for me, as well as my grandparents, my aunts and uncles. But growing up from a little boy to 0 to 14, that's when your identity is formed. And America has been formed by our parental characters and our culture, our heritage, from our clan, from our family, from our tribe. And for all of us on this channel, it represented a great nation, great hope, a great force of good. And that has been corrupted over 20 years, a little bit longer too, but over the past 20 years since 9/11, everything that we thought we enjoyed and we invested and we celebrated in this country has been turned to ashes by Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, all the corruption of the top levels of government, Eric Holder, Lanny Brewer, Merrick Garland, even people under Trump, for God's sake, Pompeo and Bolton, all these scumbags. For 20 years, our country has abandoned the original George Washington, Ronald Reagan, Teddy Roosevelt, to a certain degree, of let's be that shining light on the hill that people and countries emulate and want to become. And instead, we've taken that light on the hill and turned it into a firebrand and gone around the world threatening to burn down kingdoms like Yugoslavia, Bosnia, threatening countries, you join NATO or else we're going to turn you into ashes. Going into Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq and Yemen and Libya and now Ukraine. We're going around torching the world. Is it any wonder when these world nations say, we've got a madman running around burning the world down. We need to come together to ostracize this madman, to ostracize their firebrand, to get rid of their petrodollar, or else we're going to be infected by their violence, their madness, and their delusion. And that, sadly, is what is becoming, like you said earlier, the coverage in Abu Dhabi, that is becoming the identity, the brand of what America has degenerated into. Not because of the American people. That's why the American people are rising up saying we may have to take up arms against our own country, because we have people in the government who are madmen, who are running around burning down the world and trying to start wars to hide their own domestic and crimes and money laundering and other things. So it's ironic that the conservative people in this country share the same sentiments of fear, loathing, and disgust at the behavior of the government as these other nations do. And the reaction of forming the BRICS nation and bringing Saudi Arabia is a symptom of the disease which the United States gave birth to and has been trying to spread under the delusion of democracy. Jim?
Holly, your thoughts?
Well, I think it is pretty appropriate that we're talking about, you know, the brand of America or the culture of America and how we're perceived right now. Just with July 4th, I'm seeing like in the mainstream news over here, they're saying, oh, you know, white supremacists are showing up at the Boston Tea Party events or American Revolutionary War events or July 4th events. And I think it's just an attempt to really make it seem like anyone that wants to celebrate this holiday or get out there or spend time with family is, you know, has problems or they're not good Americans. Or I've heard people on CNN say that, you know, oh, the Constitution is dead. And what was it? One of our presidents said it's just a piece of paper or something like that. So there's a lot of the American culture that is being dismantled right now. And we're made to feel embarrassed if we want to go and spend time with our families and have a barbecue. You know, barbecue's bad for the environment. You know, it's too many carbon credits, and fireworks are too many carbon credits, and everything. Traveling is bad, too many carbon credits. They can't do the lockdowns because of disease right now. They basically got rid of July 4th past couple of years due to the lockdowns, and now they've got to come up with other reasons to basically acclimate people to the fact that you can't celebrate anything anymore. You can't have any sort of pride in your country or celebrate anything about your country. So that's kind of what I see, is just getting people to become embarrassed and not want to have anything to stand for with America, so that when and if they try to collapse it, which they're trying very hard to do so, no one has anything, you know, there's no culture or no history, and people don't even know what it's about, so it doesn't mean anything to them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's an attempt to abolish the cultural identity of the nation by destroying its historical awareness. An unsurprising development, the Biden economy is officially in recession. It became a reality today. A Fed model shows the GDP forecast is negative. Zero Hedge confirms the bad but not surprising news. There are some squirrely actions in the works as well. I'm sensing a pattern here. ADP to pause jobs report in July, working on new methodology, meaning they're going to try to find a way to shuffle the numbers to make it look more favorable. The S&P at its worst first half of the year since 1970. U.S. savings are at their lowest since 2008, just dropping precipitously. Scott, your thoughts?
Well, it's not a surprise, is it, Jim? We've talked about that. The Democrats and the Biden administration have ruined the economy by flooding it with money. The COVID-19 shutdowns and lockdowns and unconstitutional imprisonment of Americans, coupled with this pouring out of money, has caused inflation. It's saturated the dollar. The war, of course. I mean, what, 53 billion we've spent in Ukraine. You know, all of this is ruined the economy. There's no hope. There's no joy. There's no natural leadership, of course, from the walking zombie dead Biden or their Democrat automatons. This is creating a right political atmosphere for new leadership to rise up, and sadly, that's where we have the strongest deficit, is in leadership in any positions of political authority, including Donald Trump, I might add. How he continues to emerge in this evolving situation is still doubtful. I predict DeSantis is going to overshadow Trump, but we'll see what happens. But this is a perfect opportunity for aggressive, loud, robust Republicans to say, this is easily fixed, and that is by annihilating, getting rid of, shackling, imprisoning most of these government actors and policies, and getting the economy back to open transparency which it used to enjoy and flourish under between 1776 and 1870. Jim?
Well, Biden's a disaster. There are some polls, DeSantis in New Hampshire beating out Trump, but I think Trump made a profound connection with the American people. I would not count him out. Holly, your thoughts?
Well, I think people are still talking about like a Trump DeSantis ticket as well. Biden's obviously, I mean, where like the 80 something million people that voted for him, like commenting or like supporting anything that he does or even acting like they even know who this guy is. Everyone's completely quiet about this guy because he's an absolute disaster, which of course he's meant to be. I mean, we've been saying this is the purpose collapse of the United States, and he's meant to do that. And, best case scenario, he's an old bumbling idiot. He's an old man with dementia or something like that they can just, it's not really his fault. He doesn't know what's going on. That's basically what CNN is saying at this point. They have to admit that, he needs cue cards, and yeah, he's probably kind of tired. And then that's how they can make it seem like this isn't completely on purpose.
Yeah, well, just as Vanna described herself as a letter turner, Joe is a word reader, much less attractive in every possible way.